So welcome everyone to our fifth Family College Seminar, where we'll be talking today about the upcoming college fair that all juniors will participate in just a couple of weeks. And I'll provide an overview and an introduction to international education for you all. So we're really excited to offer our college fair in collaboration with the independent schools of Brooklyn and Staten Island on Thursday, May 2nd from 1:30 to 3 p.m. From 1 o'clock to 3 p.m. at the Brooklyn Paramount. This program and opportunity is going to be available for just the students. So families, unfortunately, you will not be able to participate in this college fair, but we are really excited to partner up with our friends in the college counseling offices at the Brooklyn and Staten Island independent schools to offer this college fair one more time for our students. It is a really wonderful opportunity. And as somebody who used to work a ton of college fairs back in my admissions days, it is a great time to connect with students, to share information, and for students to begin to explore and to really take the opportunity to not only delve deeper into the schools that they're interested in, but to be able to go in with curiosity and find some new and exciting opportunities that will be there as well. So in this particular day, we have about 130 college representatives that will be present at the fair, and there'll be more than 300 students in attendance. At the end of this call, when I share out the recording for the session, I will also share out the list of college representatives that are slated to be there at the college tour. And it'll be a wonderful opportunity to just review the list with your children to see what schools may be of interest for your child, schools that may be on their radar, but perhaps they don't know a ton about, and maybe even a great opportunity to identify some new opportunities that your children should go and engage with. I like to think about this, and we like to talk about it as a vibe check, to use the language of the students use. For students that have an opportunity to talk with an admissions officer to get information about the schools that they may be interested in. It is a busy experience, as you can imagine. And some schools will be really highly sought after than others. So there may not be a ton of time for your child to have a one-on-one conversation with an admissions rep. But because we will be there for 2 hours, what I encourage students to do is to make a list of the schools that they want to visit. And if in their first go around, they aren't able to meet with the rep because there's just too many people waiting to speak with them, to come back. The towards the end of the session, the crowds thin out just a wee bit, or folks just kind of disperse in different kinds of ways. So just encourage your child that if in the first go around they can't speak with the rep, come back later and there'll be an opportunity to have some more one-on-one interactions. There isn't a ton of advanced preparation that needs to be done, but if your child is going to get the best and most useful experience, I do think that some light preparation ahead of time can be really helpful. And our first big tip for students is to be more curious than certain. Again, of over 130 college reps from colleges across the country and across the globe. So there invariably will be universities present that your child may have never heard about. And just because they've never heard about it doesn't mean that it couldn't potentially be a good fit for your child. So we really want to encourage students to kind of go in with a sense of curiosity, to certainly engage with the reps that they know that they want to engage with, but to be open to hearing about new opportunities, because you never know what you may unlock if you give yourself the opportunity just to hear about on a school and hear the pitch from a particular representative. Students should go in with questions at the ready. And I would say that there's two buckets that students should consider as they're generating questions. One can be general questions. So questions that they want to ensure they ask of all representatives as they're thinking about fit, and as they're thinking about comparing and contrasting opportunities, students can ask questions consistently of all reps and can get a better understanding of how each rep answers the questions and the insight that the reps will share about their particular institutions. But certainly some students may have specific questions for representatives at the schools that they're most interested in. And that's a really great opportunity to ask those really specific questions. We're going to get into it a little bit later about what these questions could look like, but certainly making sure that we're encouraging students with those two buckets of questions will be really important. Again, when I send out the list and the students have the list of schools that will be present, highlighting the ones you want to definitively visit will be really important. And what will be incredibly and especially important is the schools that track demonstrated interest. So this is a concept that's really, really, really important that I'm going to further elaborate on during our next slide. But what I want to highlight now is that College Kickstart, which is a tool that we talked about a couple sessions ago, is a tool that students should be using pretty regularly at this point of the process. As I mentioned 2 sessions ago, College Kickstart unfortunately is only restricted to students, but I encourage you all to talk with your children and log on to College Kickstart alongside with them to not only play around and familiarize yourself with the tool, but because College Kickstart does a great job of helping students and families understand which schools track demonstrated interest. So each college university is required to submit information to the federal government, and it's called the Common Data Set. So it's a bunch of kind of profile type questions and perspectives for each college and universities that they have to report on, and the ways in which and if demonstrated interest is an important measure in their admissions process. This is where admissions officers have to report that information. So College Kickstart will let you know if demonstrated interest is something that the college tracks. So there's 4 ways that a college university can report this information to the federal government. They may identify demonstrated interest as being very important, considered, or not considered. And my tip is, unless a school does not track demonstrated interest, it is important that your children show love to the college or university. And there's many ways in which they can do that. So I want to take an opportunity to actually describe in detail what demonstrated interest is, because this may be a concept you've heard me or Lynn talk about. This may be something that you've already heard about on an information session or as you've begun engaging with the college process. But demonstrated interest in essence is a measure, and I want to say it in quotation marks, of how much your child likes a particular college and how much you've engaged with that college. The reason why colleges track this information and track a student's level of engagement with them is because every college and every dean of admissions cares about their enrollment numbers. So this is kind of the most important piece of a kind of goal. It's the most important goal an enrollment dean has is to ensure that they have and they're meeting their target numbers. So if they are looking to enroll an incoming class of 100 students, then it is really important that the admissions dean does everything in their power to ensure that all 100 seats that are available are filled once the process is said and done. And this is a really, really important piece of the process that colleges have to pay very close attention to, because when they're looking at their yield rate, and the yield rate is the percentage of students who are saying yes to an offer of admissions, when we look at the private nonprofit universities across the country, the overall yield rate is about 30%. So only 30% of students are saying yes to offers of admissions to, on average, to any college or university, right? And that's 25% for public universities and tends to be about 33% at private universities. So as you can imagine, if you are at the helm of leading an admissions office and your admissions office or your admissions team historically only yields about 30% of the students you make offers of admissions to, you have to be very, very strategic about how you're making admissions offers and to whom you're making these offers to. So part of the calculus and part of the consideration that an admissions office may have to think about is how likely is it that this applicant will actually attend our institution if we offer them admissions for the fall? And while this is not a perfect science, right, you can never guarantee or predict what a 17-year-old will do, there is some certainty in knowing that if your child never engages with the college, never shows up for an information session, never visits, never says hello at the fair, never comes to see the rep, whether here at Brooklyn Friends, then an admissions office has reason to believe that even if the student is a great candidate and could be definitely academically admissible, if this child has not engaged in any way with the college, then there may be big question marks about whether or not they should admit the student or not, right? And while this is not going to be true for every college, and the way that every college measures demonstrated interest will differ, what is important is that your child does show some degree of engagement with the vast majority of colleges that they're going to be applying into. And there's some really simple ways that you can do this that don't require you going overboard. I tell students that the easiest thing that they can do is to sign up for a college's mailing list through the admissions websites. So you are likely noticing that your child is getting tons of emails from a lot of different colleges, some colleges that you've never heard of, some colleges that your child may not even know how they ended up on their mailing list. But long story short, there's two ways that a child could end up on a college's mailing list. One, the college is purchasing information. So if your child took the PSATs, that enters their emails into a system that the colleges then can purchase and say, hey, you are scoring or have scored in a range that we think could be competitive. You should check out our school, right? So they're doing those marketing emails to try to get the child interested in their particular university. But that's more of a passive step. The child doesn't have any responsibility in signing up for that mailing list. But they become a prospect or enter the prospect list when a student is doing something active, which is they're actively signing up for the mailing list and actively showing interest in that particular university. So if your child is already identifying schools that are of interest, and you know, based on your research from College Kickstart, that demonstrated interest is important at that particular university, then make sure at the minimum that you are signing up, that your child is signing up for their mailing list. If possible, it is also important to visit the college for an in-person information session and tour. Now, no college will ever hold it against you if you can't visit, if it's not within reason to do so, right? So no college in California that tracks demonstrated interest would have any expectation that kids from New York are going to fly over to visit the school when that's not feasible for all students, and that creates equity concerns. But if a school that existed in New York City tracks demonstrated interest and you've never visited, that's a different signal because the barriers to entry are going to look very, very different, right? So when possible, we certainly encourage you all to be going in for in-person information sessions and tours. However, again, because of the equity concerns and because so many schools now offer virtual information sessions, that's a great way to learn about the institution and to engage and demonstrate interest. Because when you sign up for those virtual information sessions, the colleges are collecting information about your child. So that's another great way to not leave your home and still demonstrate interest. In the fall, beginning in September, all the way through November, we're going to have admissions officers coming in during the students' free periods to engage and talk about their institutions. So that's another way that students are not going to only be able to learn about schools, but also demonstrate interest by just going downstairs and meeting with the rep when they're here. Opening emails is also really important because colleges do track if you've opened an email, how long you had that email up for, how many clicks did you engage with on their particular websites. Now, they're not going to be obsessive about this, right? But if it's a school of interest, you should encourage your child to be navigating through their websites. You should be encouraging your child to at least open up the emails from the schools that they're interested in and check out whatever it is that they are sending. You don't have to be obsessive about this, but it shouldn't be something that falls to the wayside either. If it makes sense to do so, emailing an admissions officer can be a great way to demonstrate interest. And there are times where students have questions, or they want to be connected with on-campus resources, or they have kind of just specific questions that they can't necessarily get on a website. Emailing an admissions officer would always be a great way to demonstrate interest. Do you need to do it across the board? Absolutely not. Do most students end up reaching out to an admissions officer? No. But if it makes sense to do so, then we highly encourage to do that. And certainly in schools that do track interest, they um are likely more responsive to student emails. And this could be a great way to just create lines of communication as well. If an interview is available, please take him up off on the offer. Some students can begin interviewing as soon as the summer, where some schools will offer in-person interviews with admissions officers or with student ambassadors. And if your child has never done an interview or is apprehensive about a college interview, Lynn and I will absolutely be there to help support and help prepare them for that. But that can be another great way to engage. And interviews for most students will happen in the fall, and we'll talk about that more in the fall. But if you have an opportunity to engage one-on-one with someone from the university, we encourage you to do so. And lastly, make sure that you visit them during the college fair. So if there is a school that your child's interested in, they track demonstrated interest, make sure that your child is going to go and talk to the rep on the fair. That is the lowest hanging fruit that we can do right now in terms of demonstrating interest for these colleges. So going back to the question about, how is it that we can help students prepare for this experience? It's really thinking about helping them come up with good questions to ask. So as we're going through the junior college seminar experience, we are having students as a part of our class time come up with questions and workshop them. So your child, if they've had class already, should already have a list of questions that they want to think about. If they have class this week, this is what we're going to be talking about. But when I think about good questions, and I think about it from the perspective of someone again who used to work as an admissions officer and used to work in college fairs, kind of knowing what questions really got me going and really got me excited to talk about the university versus questions that, again, well intentioned, but you could have answered really quickly if you opened up the view book or if you did a quick Google search about our university, right? So there are things that I would encourage your child to go deeper into, right, to get more of a valuable output from that particular question. So if you ask, do you have a bio major? Most schools have a biology major. If you pick up my brochure, you will see the list of majors that our university offers. So it kind of communicates that you just really haven't taken the time to even do the bare minimum, right? But if you ask a more in-depth question like, hey, does 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 your biology major have concentrations within it? So because I have a specific interest in molecular biology, can I go into that level of depth at your particular college? That may be a more kind of robust question that requires a bit more research and a little bit more due diligence that an admissions officer would be happy to ask. It's important to help your children understand, too, that admissions officers are generalists. They're tasked to learn and understand the university as a whole. So they may know pretty broadly lots of things about their college or university, but may not have the specific insights into particular programs. So we just have to set up that expectations for students that they aren't turned off if a admissions rep couldn't tell them about the molecular biology program because that rep may not have any insight into the bio program outside from the fact of knowing that one exists. So if you know that and have that expectation, then students can understand that there just may be perspectives the admissions officer may not be able to address. But some admissions officers are also alums of the university, and the students will know that if it says the class year on their name tag, or perhaps when the admissions officer is introducing themselves, they will say that they're an alum of that particular institution. And if that is indeed the case, that can be a great time to ask more in-depth and experiential questions because then the rep can speak from the I perspective. Even if some time has passed since they graduated, there's still good questions that you can ask alumni to really get a good sense about what the school is, what it meant for them, and then importantly, what keeps them still engaged and connected with the institution. So some questions that your children could think about and may ask in the fair could be, what is a tradition that students get really excited about? A great question that gets about campus culture, right? And the things that bring people together in the community. What are your largest classes and how many students are enrolled in them? So this is one of my favorite questions because it goes beyond student to faculty ratios and it helps you understand kind of what could an introductory course look like and how big may that be. I always give the example of my undergraduate institution and my graduate institution. At undergrad, my biggest class was a geoscience course of 80 people, and that's the biggest class I ever took. But in grad school, the biggest class there was a 700 person introduction to psychology course. So a huge difference in a really important academic experience. And I think that tells me more about what a student may be experiencing, especially in their first year, versus a student to faculty ratio, which is an important data point, but isn't telling of the entire picture here. How do students and faculties interact outside of the classroom? Are there opportunities for students to get to know their professors and get to engage with them in a way that's taking them outside of the classroom setting? One of my favorite experiences that I feel like is becoming more commonplace now, which is at my college, the college would give you $10 to take your professor out for lunch or have him out for a coffee. And it's a great way to encourage relationships, getting to know people, taking them outside of the context of a classroom and really engaging with the adults there who are really invested in you, right? So if those opportunities exist, maybe a great thing for your child to think about and kind of think about in terms of their kind of excitement about their institution. And then another one could be, why do you enjoy working for the college? So really getting at the heart of the admissions officer and getting them to talk about their experiences, their connection to the institution, even if they're not alums, to see again what is it that excites them about working for them and kind of promoting that school to future generations. So lots of things that we can be preparing our students for in the next week. A couple things I just want to make sure that everyone's aware about. So sometime this week, your child will receive an email from a company called StriveScan. And StriveScan is is going to be a way for students to generate a QR code, which is going to be consisting of their name, email addresses, date of birth, information that colleges want to know so that they can be added to their prospect list, so that it can be added to their mailing list. So as soon as students start seeing emails for StriveScan, please encourage them to sign up, to fill out that information, and importantly, that they're using the same email that they will intend to use when they apply for college. So colleges will match up student records most primarily through name and date of birth, but sometimes email can be another way to connect kind of the dots for institutions. So encourage your child that as they're signing up, ask them, is this the email that you want to receive future communications with colleges for? And will you check that email with frequency, right? So make sure there's consistency there. And again, as we mentioned, it'll be a great way to take a point off or add a point rather for demonstrated interest. So your students will be getting information about that this week. They're going to be bombarded with a lot of information. So encourage your child to have a tote bag or maybe leave some books behind the day of so that they can fill their backpacks with brochures. And once they get these brochures, have them sit down and go through them, right? This is kind of like the easiest, lowest hanging fruit in college research, right? If you're looking and understanding from the broadest perspective possible what a university or institution is, you're going to see it through their review book, right? And if it's something that sounds interesting, then you know that is your signal to encourage your child to do further research, right? But they're going to get a ton of information, and I encourage them to collect as much brochures as possible and to begin at their leisure, kind of reviewing them as well. Having something to take notes on will be really important. I've encouraged students to keep handwritten notes just so that it doesn't, if they may be on their phones taking notes, and that's totally legitimate, but that may read as disrespectful. It may read like you're texting while I am listening, while an admissions officer is presenting something to you. So just remind them, and as we will as well, that their QR codes and their phones will be for that, to scan their QR codes, but that they should be doing their due diligence and doing some handwritten notes so that they can go back again at the end of the experience and compare and contrast what they're reading and learning about from these schools. And then lastly, it's just keeping track of the schools that are the must visits, the ones that students really want to go to, really want to hear more about. And if it's demonstrated interest, and if there's a theme here today, is about making sure that demonstrated interest and we're showing the love. And I talk about it so much because at this stage of the process for my seniors, there have been conversations I've had with admissions reps who have said, we may have decided differently, but but the student didn't show any kind of demonstrated interest, right? And again, we want to make sure that we are doing everything that's really easy and that's right in front of us. And this is, again, one of the first ways in which you're going to be able to do just that. So that's the nutshell about the college fair. I would love for you guys to be able to participate in this, but we want to keep this a student-friendly experience, especially since there are other partner institutions there. But we do encourage you all to have follow-up conversations with your child that Thursday to talk about the experience, what they learned, what they didn't learn, and hopefully you are seeing some new and exciting opportunities on the horizon. So that was kind of our kind of whirlwind overview of the college. I want to shift gears right now to talk about international education and really thinking about students who may be considering getting their undergraduate degree outside of the United States. And that's going to be the focus of this afternoon. So I want to begin our talk by giving a really big shout out and a huge thanks to our friends at the Association of International Regional Representatives North America. They are a collective of admissions officers who represent universities across the globe, but all of whom are based on in the United States. So these reps live in the US, they travel in the US, and they're a phenomenal resource for us as counselors and for students as well, as you are thinking about and potentially thinking about an experience abroad for the undergraduates. They worked with us last year to create this presentation, so I just want to give them credit where credit is due, because this was really, really good and helpful information at our hand. So I think if you are here to hear more about studying abroad for the 4-year, 3-year experience, then it is possible that your child is already curious about studying internationally, right? But I think there's a lot to consider and a lot of really exciting pieces to consider as you're thinking about whether or not to send your child abroad for their undergraduate experience. And the benefits of an international education certainly are going to overlap from the benefits of getting an education here domestically, right? You're thinking about and you're evaluating academic opportunities. You're thinking about the personal growth that your child's going to be experiencing in new environments. You're certainly evaluating the levels of professional opportunities and kind of the return on investment for whatever degree it is that your child's pursuing, independent of the institution, right? There's going to be certain elements that will feel consistent from what you want to consider domestically and internationally. But I think that there is a really different perspective that students who are considering studying abroad kind of are bringing into the table, right? Going abroad and living on your own is going to feel drastically different than anything your child will experience here in the context of the US, right? So if your child is hungry for independence, or they are already are independent and very self-sufficient, you can see tremendous growth by going abroad, immersing yourself in a new culture, in a new environment, perhaps in a new language, right? To really kind of put yourself and situate yourself in a global context and kind of take yourself out from what you've experienced in the day-to-day here in the US or here in New York and think about it in the context of another country. Um, I think that often when I have conversations with students and families about studying internationally, there's certainly a hesitation. Like, what will this mean when my child comes back to the US, if that's what they want to do? Will they be able to find a job? Will grad schools recognize their degrees? And the reality is that yes, they absolutely will. And some can even make the case that you actually stand out in a very different way if you received your degree abroad and you're coming for a first year job right after college back in the States, because you're going to your child will have an experience that will differ than the vast majority of folks, right? There's a lot of independence, there's a lot of kind of core skills that you're developing when you're outside of your comfort zone, when you're outside in a new country, that you have to navigate and build in very real ways that will stretch your child in really positive ways that could actually be really marketable when they're thinking about grad school, or could be really marketable when they're thinking about internships or opportunities for the workforce once they get back to the States. So there's a lot of really rich kind of perspectives to consider, and knowing that we exist in a global context and higher education is no different, right? We may not be aware of the opportunities that exist outside of the US if that's not our immediate frame of reference, but that doesn't mean that folks in different industries don't know schools in Scotland or Canadian universities, right? So really knowing that the world is your child's oyster can be super, super, super exciting. But with that being said, it's also really important to recognize that studying abroad for your undergraduate experience may not be the right move for all students, right? I think that as I've worked with students who studied abroad, and I say studied abroad for their undergraduate experience versus doing a semester abroad or even a year abroad, I think that they've been different profile students, right? They're students who are pretty fiercely independent. They tend to be students who are really curious about the world, who consider themselves or wanting to consider themselves kind of global citizens. There's students who are really adaptable, who can go into new settings and feel comfortable traversing newness, new cultures, new people, new experiences. They're going to, the students who aren't going to be rattled when they have to readjust kind of their daily life and kind of readjust the things that they take for granted, right? Like, will they get unnerved going through the process of opening up a bank account? Or are they going to get scared or intimidated by perhaps speaking another language because that may be the dominant language in that particular culture, right? Nerves for sure are going to be true for any student going into any new environment, and leaving home potentially for the first time. But for those students who really want to step into and step outside of the context of the US, you do need that sense of kind of adventure and sense of independence because that will be really different, right? The idea of a residential college, as we kind of stereotypically know of, while that does exist abroad, it's going to feel very different, right? I've done a number of counselor programs that have taken me to universities across the globe, and like the living situation is different. Like your child has to cook for themselves. They may have to be comfortable going to the grocery store. Communal living, sure, that's going to be true even in the context of the US, but you're doing more like communal cooking and kind of building that kind of home environment. And if your child is really excited about that, if they don't have any nerves about doing that, if this sounds like it activates them, then it may be worthwhile for them to consider studying internationally, and this may be a really good fit for them. And certainly, as you're thinking about the college search, there are certainly lots of factors to consider, many factors that aren't dissimilar to the perspectives that your child has to think about for colleges in the US, right? So when you've been having your second meetings with Lynn and I, we've been having conversations about, the different factors that your child should consider about how they want to live their life, their values, what's important for them. Those perspectives still matter when you're thinking about in schools internationally, but as even with domestic schools, perhaps your child's preferences shift depending on the schools they may be thinking about. So for in my experience, it hasn't been uncommon if a student comes to me and says, "Hey, Frank, in the context of the US, I want to stay somewhere in a college town or a small town, somewhere away from a city. But if I'm going to study internationally, I want to be in a city. I want to be in a metropolitan area, right?" So these considerations, we should still be fielding the conversations with students because they will still matter in terms of finding fit the different universities, right? Language will certainly be a really important one, an important consideration that may not be, that isn't this exist in the same way as if you're thinking about studying domestically, right? So does your child want to exist in an English speaking country? Does your child want to be in a program or need to be in a program where English is the primary mode of instruction? Or does your child have fluency in another language and can survive an academic setting in that particular language, right? Because then that's really helping us navigate how we point students towards different opportunities, because there will be schools that are in countries where English isn't the primary language, but the mode of instruction will be in English, right? So these are just some nuances that you have to be considerate of. And certainly, every institution is going to represent a different style of learning. So abroad, schools by and large are going to be public universities. There will be the larger universities, but some private institutions do exist, though they tend to be more specialized, like schools of nursing, for instance, or art schools. Those may be more often what you encounter when you encounter private universities, but most schools abroad will be public institutions. As we're thinking about different university structures, there will be some universities that are US universities that have overseas campuses. So for instance, New York University has a branch in Abu Dhabi, has a branch in Shanghai. So you are graduating with an NYU degree with a particular emphasis on global learning and global outlook, but you're housed in a, different part of the world, right? So you're still kind of get that name brand recognition, even though it's going to represent a totally different academic experience than what the host institution experience could look like. And then another kind of difference here could be American universities abroad. So these are 4-year accredited universities that are accredited by the states that are more reflective of a traditional 4-year liberal arts kind of American style of education, but situated in different cities across the globe, right? So certainly lots of different factors to consider, definitely some pros and some cons to consider as you're thinking about different types of institutions, but knowing that these structures exist is really, really essential and really important. I want to provide just some kind of overview and some information about the kind of academic structures and admissions policies for these institutions, but we have to put a huge, ginormous asterisk here because everything that I will share, just like in the US, depends widely by institution, by region, and by country, right? So even within country, there's not going to be a unanimous or systematic way in which students apply, or kind of a more formalized way in which students apply. So we have to just keep in mind that what I'm going to share is some kind of broad information, but as your child is potentially identifying areas of interest and countries of interest, we will hone in specifically to think about kind of what that process looks like for that institution or for that country and help you navigate around that as your child begins this process. So from an academic perspective, would say that one of the big differences can be timing, right? That programs abroad could be 3 or 4 year programs, right? In the UK, programs are going to be 3 years in length, whereas in Scotland and Ireland, they tend to be 4 years in length, right? So the different academic structures here. In my experience, a lot of these universities have far fewer general education requirements than what most universities in the United States offer. So what that means is that flexibility for your child will look like. And typically when I am counseling students who are curious about studying internationally, what I invite them to think about is really understanding what it is that they want to study and why, because that is going to be the kind of driving factor in their search process in a way that it's not the same for schools in the US, right? We can go in colleges in the US and be undecided and have our first 2 years to explore. And certainly there's going to be some variance and differences across programs and across institutions, but there's a lot more flexibility that the US style education offers that may not be universally true abroad. So it's really, really important that your child understands what they want to study or perhaps what they want to do outside of college to help guide them in their search for international institutions. These processes and programs will look particularly distinctive for pre-professional programs because they are kind of a fast track into those career fields, right? So for programs like medicine, veterinary medicine, dentistry, law, these are programs that are designed to help graduates go into their field and be licensed and accredited in those countries to be a practicing doctor, to be a practicing lawyer, right? So if your child has these pre-professional interests and they know that they want to stay or live long term in those countries, this can be a great way to kind of help them enter these professions for a lot less time and a lot less money. And the interesting thing is that there's many programs that may also have articulation agreements with the United States or with New York State more specifically. So the one that I love to uplift is that in Ireland, if you get your undergraduate degree in law, you are in essence doing a JD in those 3 years. That is, you are studying law. That is what your program is doing. There again, because there's not the same number of general education requirements, your child is in a more intensive track. And Ireland has an articulation agreement with New York State so that students who graduate with their law degree from Ireland can sit for the New York State bar exam. So that's pretty cool. You don't have to go to law school. You bypass that because of the way that a degree in Ireland sets you up is going to be more reflective of that graduate school experience than it would be here, right? Those opportunities exist, and if certainly that is specific to the country, specific to the program, specific to the university. But knowing that these things exist could really open up some really interesting conversations with your children. The ways in which you will apply to these programs are going to be really different. Some schools and some institutions, they're going to have their own specific application. Sometimes they're going to apply to kind of a country-specific application, or for some institutions, you can apply to the Common App. We are going to be working with students very closely of identifying the schools and the methods for which they apply to. Generally speaking, with few exception, students tend to submit applications for schools in the US first and then work on their international applications because those deadlines tend to happen later in the academic year. So we have a little bit more flexibility here. But certainly, if your child is only thinking about international institutions, we will make sure that we work with them to develop a timeline that is appropriate for what that institution or that country has set. As I mentioned earlier, the academics are going to be most important, right? So as you're doing research on any number of these schools, you're going to focus in on the programs of interest, the courses, the faculties. Those are some languages that institutions internationally use, where we use majors. They may say course or faculty. That is really where you're entering the research, right? Because the application that you ultimately submit has to substantiate why your child is a good fit for that particular program, right? And it's not asking about the same kinds of information that the Common App does. So you have to be a little bit more laser focused about the academic interest and the degree of flexibility that your child is looking for, right? Scotland could be a great example and a great place to be because there's a 4-year program, there's a 4-year degrees, and they're modeled kind of the liberal arts education is modeled after kind of the Scottish higher education system. But if your child is like not interested in doing a bunch of general education things and they want to be laser focused on a particular degree or two program, then you know that international institutions may be a great fit for your child. Test optional is not and doesn't exist in the same landscape as it does for colleges in the US. And the reason that this particularly impacts us is because we are an IB school. So even if a child has a very strong SAT score, the colleges are going to make decisions based on your child's predicted IB exam results. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit, right? Because that will be kind of one of the most critical pieces of information that colleges are going to evaluate your students on. So as I said, this will be different than in the US, where we really talk about holistic admissions, looking at the whole child, thinking about institutional priorities, demonstrated interest, recommendation letters, so on and so forth, personal qualities, right? All the elements that we want to uplift and center in the application process for schools in the US is going to be different for international admissions, right? Because test scores and academic history may be much more important. The recommendations, you may not be asked for a recommendation. Like in Canadian universities, they don't ask for recommendations. So you don't have to worry about that. The essays tend to be very different than the essays that colleges in the US will ask students for, right? In the context of the UK, that personal statement is all about your fit for the academic program you're applying to, not about who you are as a person and what makes you interesting. It's the experiences, both academically and extracurricularly, that have set you up for success for that particular faculty that you're interested in applying into. And some programs may have additional requirements or interview processes. And again, that will be specific not to the university, but to the program within the university. So as I mentioned earlier, testing is going to be really, really important. And what students will be considered based off of will be the IB exam results, right? So up at the time of the application, students will be able to submit their predicted IB grades as a measure of competitiveness, not for the university, but for the program within the university, right? So again, really focusing on the program and really looking and understanding what the minimum entry requirements are. And this will make the process a lot more transparent because you know what you have to where you have to achieve. And with the predicted grades, which we hope to share with students by the end of the year, your child knows more or less how competitive they are from what the minimum requirements are for that particular institution, right? So as you're doing research with your children, it's really important that you look at the entry requirements for the IB program and understand what the minimum IB points are to be competitive for the school, right? And also look into if there's any specific class requirements and minimum scores within there, right? So a school may say our most competitive students will have a 32 out of 45 points on the IB exam, but they must have 3 HL courses, and of those 3 HL courses, 2 of them must be in a math or science course, and the student must achieve at least a 5 on those HL courses, right? So every school and every program will vary, but the requirements are pretty clearly cut and pretty clearly laid out. So it's really important that you are carefully reviewing this information. And why this matters and why this differs from schools in the US is the ways in which these institutions offer admissions, right? So many institutions abroad will offer a student a conditional offer. So they'll look at their application, they'll look at their predicted IB scores, and they'll say, "Hey, we are going to give you a conditional offer to our institution." So that's like saying, like, we want you, but you must achieve this total IB point by the time that the IB results come out in July of their senior year, right? So that means that if your child was offered a conditional offer to the University of Glasgow for an English program, but they have to obtain a 36 on the IB, that means that your child is not going to be formally accepted into the institution until they show proof that they passed the IB exam with a minimum score of a 36. So this elongates the timeline for our students who are studying internationally because they won't receive their final IB results until the second week of July. And certainly when that time comes, we will help students navigate that. There is definitely a lot of variance in terms of what students can do if they achieve the scores or if they did not achieve the scores, right? And we'll work with students individually to figure those pieces out. Again, and this may be different for those students who are applying both internationally and domestically, because students will know from their domestic schools what schools that they've gotten into. And by the time that they receive their IB results, they will have enrolled in a domestic school, right? So they know kind of what their backup option is, and they're just waiting until their final IB results to see what happens there. So certainly, as you can imagine, this drastically differs school to school, country to country, but I want to make sure that you all understand this framework because this will become much more important next year. Cost is certainly a big consideration, and it's actually a big reason why students and it compels students and families to think of colleges outside of the US, because no matter which way you shake it, schools outside of the US are so much cheaper than they are within the US, right? Even when you factor in housing costs, they can still be cheaper than what you may pay for in a school in the US, right? Certainly, this is not going to be true for all students and all families. Financial aid and kind of your financial need will definitely be a big factor in kind of deciding what is more affordable. But it is worthwhile to note that, again, in this particular example, University of Colorado at Boulder as an out-of-state student is probably going to run you maybe this year close to $70,000 a year versus going to St. Andrews is going to cost you $58,000, and that includes room and board. So these things can just be so much cheaper. And certainly, if you consider the context of the country and the exchange rate, that may favor us even more so. And if your child has citizenship, that may also play a big role into cost because if your child, for instance, is they are a Canadian citizen, even though they are a student and a resident of the United States, they will qualify for Canadian tuition, which is going to be significantly cheaper compared to anything that you'd probably pay in the US. So these are important pieces to certainly keep in mind. But certainly there are also ways in which affordability and good planning will go into this consideration as well. So while you will not qualify for grants, because grants are something the institution offers, if your child needs to and wants to take out any loans, they can do so through the federal government, and they're eligible to take that abroad. The GI Bill also translates across the pond in case, but that's going to be dependent on country. And certainly, if you have any 529 plans, you can also use that to subsidize the cost of educations abroad. Scholarship opportunities are certainly also available, though they're mostly based on merit, so on your child's academic profile. But there are some opportunities that are available either specifically through the university as they offer to international students, or kind of opportunities that just exist through different scholarship searches. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, just thinking about the logistics of perhaps a 3-year degree, or you're in a country where the dollar favors really well, or your child is thinking about a country where the cost of living is particularly low, there may be significant cost adjustments, and it plays in your favor if your child studies internationally. And as I mentioned earlier, residency can also play a really big impact if you have dual citizenship to that particular country, right? And certainly for professional programs, there may be more cost associated with that. But then thinking about the time that you may potentially save by not having to go to med school here or veterinary school here could be something to consider as you think about your child's overall kind of strategy and plan and when they're thinking about career outcomes. Certainly, the studentaid.gov gives a lot of great information about international institutions and the ones that participate in federal loans and which ones do accept them, which ones do not. Certainly, as parents, I think it's most important, or one of the most important factors to consider is really thinking about employability, kind of what's going to happen to your child while they're on campus and what happens to them off campus and beyond the university experience. And these schools really do a lot of great work to support their international students to make sure that living there is, as easy and streamlined as possible. So they work with students to get part-time work, to work with students to make sure that they have the appropriate visas in case they want to work part-time. Different countries have different agreements with students about how long they may be able to stay in the country post-graduation in case they find opportunities there. But there are going to be other countries like Canada that do a great job of co-op programs and making internships a part of the four-year experience. And certainly that's not an uncommon experience for universities abroad. So thinking about the ways in which the university supports students while they're there and after graduation should be a really important part of your search, as it would be too for schools domestically. Um, and from a matter of kind of like support, what will be different than what you would have to do if you were to think about schools in the US is really thinking about international support services, right? Because these international hubs, these student resources will likely be an important center for your child as they're navigating the transition to a new country, as they're finding support, as they're trying to find a sense of community, and also making sure that they're kind of being set up for success as best as possible wherever it is that they may be. So just like the international student support services here in the US are really robust for international students, it will be for your child as well as an international student of that institution. So giving them academic advising, financial support, career opportunities, so on and so forth, really, 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 really an important element that I would be incumbent for not only your child, but you too to understand the adults who will be there supporting, caring for your child. And campus life certainly is going to be, just as it is for any school, important and part of the experience, right? We want students to be happy, healthy, whole human beings. And while school and learning is important, they are going to be in a new setting with new people in a new country, right? So thinking about the ways in which they would engage and find community is going to be important, not dissimilar from what they would do anyway for schools domestically, but with a few differences, right? Sports are going to be different. They don't have kind of organized sports through the NCAA like we do, right? It may be more club and intramural, right? Doesn't mean that students don't like playing sports, but it's not going to be the same kind of athletic kind of rah-rah kind of energy than you may get at a Big Ten school here, right? Fraternities or sororities don't really exist outside the context of North America. So if that's important for your child, this may not be the right fit for them, but it may be. And certainly everything else that makes a robust campus experience important will be important. As a parent, looking and understanding accommodations will be incredibly essential, right? Does this university offer international housing? Does the student have to find their own housing? Do the majority of students live on campus or off campus, right? Are you more kind of a city experience or are you more of a kind of traditional college campus like we understand them in the context of the US, right? There will be lots of differences and lots of regional differences. So helping your child understand what they want will be really important, but certainly that level of independence, no matter what the kind of accommodations are, will be incredibly important. And last but not least is travel, right? You are going to be in different parts of the world, and these institutions and these countries are going to be gateways for opportunities, right? So not only thinking about the kind of cultural experience and the social experience of what your children could have access to internationally, but just thinking about the ways that the globe is connected to one another. I did a program last year in Ireland, and I didn't know too much about the country, and I didn't know too much about the kind of the ways in which Ireland has positioned itself as like the gateway to Europe, and all these multinational organizations having home bases in Dublin, which I just found just so interesting, right? Because if you're a student studying in Dublin or studying in Ireland, you have access to all of these sectors and industries right in your backyard. And that can take you and really put your child in a really globally connected community in really fascinating and interesting kinds of ways. So, really thinking about both the kind of experiential elements of being abroad and what they may have access to, but also thinking about the ways in which, again, we exist in our globalized economy could provide interesting and great kind of perspectives to think about as your child is thinking about potentially studying internationally. So if you have further questions, certainly Lynn and I are always here as supporters, but I want to uplift the Association of International Regional Representatives North America as a really phenomenal resource and a phenomenal group of people who, again, are based throughout the US, but are really great to talk to, really happy to talk to students and families, not only about their respective institutions, but about the prospect of studying internationally. NACAC, the National Association for College Admissions Guys Counseling, has a really wonderful guide to international admissions and kind of gives a country by country profile of things to consider as you're thinking about different countries and some of the regional differences. And certainly, again, the IRNA, the Association of International Regional Reps, is a great resource as well. If there are schools that your child is thinking about and has honed in on, and they want to talk to someone who is kind of responsible for recruiting in North America and are able to give you really great information. So at that point, I just want to stop my screen share and then open it up to any questions that you guys may have. Again, if you want to chat it, throw it in the chat box. That's amazing. If you want to just hop on and ask, that's great as well. One question that was asked in the Q&A box was, do colleges track social media engagement? That's a good question that I'm not 100% sure of, right? I think if your child receives an email from a college and they have links to their social media accounts, the colleges could track that you've clicked on those links and engage with their social media. But they are not following, in most instances, your child on social media, right? So they're not going to follow your child back or request them to be their friend on TikTok or Instagram. That's totally not the case, right? But this does bring up a question and a perspective that we will talk with students pretty frequently next year and now is about responsible social media presences and making sure that they are not posting things they wouldn't want an adult to find or they wouldn't want a college to find. Because if they have a public page, it doesn't mean that an admissions officer is going to go seek them out, but if they were ever curious about a student, they could, right? So don't leave yourself vulnerable to something that can kind of jeopardize your standing with admissions. But they're not going to be actively tracking you and your social media and try to follow you back. Another question came in the chat box. Are you talking with students about how to be contacting admissions advisors, past questions in writing, and what to do if they don't get a response? Yes, we are talking about that in the context of this class session right now. So we want to introduce the idea, and in many of our classes, students talked about kind of when is it that they can and should reach out to an admissions officer, when does it make sense to do so, and Lynn and I will be great about helping students craft emails too. We want to make sure that we're building that self-advocacy skills, so we want to make sure that we are both encouraging students to kind of take that leap of faith, but we also recognize like the scariness of it all to be reaching out to a rep, especially with the school that you're in love with, right? So we will work with students to make sure that the message is correct, that they are sending, and that the message is what they are intending to share. And as you mentioned, Lisa, also recognizing that like admissions officers are busy people, and depending on when you reach out, they may or may not get back to you if they're also reading applications or if they're traveling. So sometimes we just have to be patient. Recognize that the intention could be good to want to reach out, but if an admissions officer ghosts you, to not interpret that as they don't like you, they don't want you, it won't be competitive. It's just, you know, I'm sure we all know people who aren't great about responding to emails. That's no different from an admissions rep. Okay, one more question came through. I heard that McGill University recently started requiring students to pass very advanced French exam in order to receive a diploma from that school. Do you know if that is the case? Not that I'm aware of. Um, Knowing French could be helpful to navigate Montreal, but it's not a requirement. McGill is a English-speaking university. I don't know, and I can follow up about this, if there are kind of requirements to take French as a foreign language if a student is not a native French speaker, but I don't think the student has to pass a French exam in order to graduate. But let me follow up on that because maybe there's something that I'm not quite seeing. But what I will say, just because we're on the context of Canada, was that this if any of your children are thinking about Canadian universities, what we have to be mindful of is that the Canadian government this year passed a bill that's limiting the number of international students that Canadian universities can accept. And that number is going to differ province by province. And this is because of the housing crisis that Canada is facing across the board. So while I don't know definitively what this will mean in terms of admissions numbers, it is something that we have to be mindful of. And certainly, as the universities get more direct feedback from the local provinces about the adjustments that need to be made, then that's information that they will share and communicate with us. But that's going to be just a new difference for this year. All right. So I do want to be mindful of time. If there are any further questions, please email me. I will be happy to continue and follow up with you. As always, I will share the recording out with you all later today, if not tomorrow, and I will share the list of colleges that will be participating in the May 2nd college tour. Until then, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you in our next iteration of the our Family College Seminar series. Take care, everyone, and have a great day.